in an equal manner. And that debate is now at least heavily taking place in NATO, and that's very good.
Okay, next.
Sweden is the third largest donor of military support in absolute terms, and that we are proud to be that. So no buts, but it would be far better if more countries competed with our size of support, for obvious reasons, and in the long term. Now we have the 90 billion euros loan on place. That's great, but that is not a way to exclude or a way to decrease the national supports, because this is a war that will go on as long as the Russians don't comply to decent conditions for peace. And that's why we need to be long-term and firm in our support. So I really would like more countries that speak so extremely well about Ukraine to also put the money where the mouth is.
Okay.
Well, we are doing joint efforts all the time, I would say.
Swedish radio.
Step by step.
Swedish radio over there, then SVT.
Yes, a question for Mark Rutte. You keep saying that the defense industry in Europe needs to ramp up. They need to step up, deliver more. On the same time, the defense industry feels, well, a bit insecure that once they've ramped up, that the interest for their products will decline. How can NATO, so to say, ease their mind so they, dare taking the risk of ramping up, building up?
These are commercial companies. I worked in a commercial company for 10 years, not in the defense industry, but in a commercial company. Commercial companies are there to make sure that when there are business opportunities, you grasp them. There is now a huge business opportunity because in NATO, we are spending so much more. The US is spending more, but look at Europe and Canada. I mean, getting into on an equal footing when it comes to the overall defense spending with the US. Tens and tens and tens of billions each year, hundreds of billions over the coming years coming in. Look at Germany, doubling its defense spending in 29 compared to 21, over 150 billion by 29. And we know that about 20–30% of defense spending goes to the defense industry. So the money coming in, massively. Now we have to make sure that Sweden, the Netherlands and all the other NATO allies are not buying for a higher price the same. No, they have to buy more for at least the same price or lower. And that means more production lines, more production capacity. The good news is that most defense industrial companies get this, that the financial sector gets it. I had a meeting yesterday with a wide variety of financial sector organizations and banks and companies discussing this, making sure that what can they do to support the defense industry doing it. And it is something where we have a problem here, but also in the US. The US has exactly the same problem. You've seen the American president being very forceful with the big primes in the US, forcing them to quadruple the production. And I spoke with one of those CEOs a couple of days later. He was still trembling from that meeting in the White House. So that was good news. But I think in the end we will get there. And I think you will see in Ankara, where this is a main issue to be discussed, that a lot is happening. And again here, Sweden is helping, because you had already traditionally a very broad defense industrial base. Here also discussion is going on, how can we produce more for the whole of the alliance, and that's good news.
So in your opinion, it's not a risk for the defense industry, it's more of an opportunity?
It's a huge opportunity, and because the money is there, and we know that the money has to be spent. And we can, of course, we need the men and women in uniform, first of all, but we also, we need for them to have the gear necessary to fight the war. And therefore, you need the defense industrial output.
But let's also recognize the fact that these are complicated markets for obvious reasons. They're extremely long-term. They are built on political decisions. But I think that for very unfortunate reasons, nowadays, these companies, they are actually convinced that we are here for the long term. And also it requires some kind of public support as well. We have in a quite rapid manner gone from a situation where these companies quite often were kind of mistaken for something unsustainable, almost something you shouldn't do at all, until today, where I saw one of these small Swedish companies, they had defending democracy as the payoff to their company name. So I think there is something changing right now, for unfortunate reasons, but still, that's a good sign.
Now a short final question from SVT.
Americans are expected to present their contribution to the NATO force model. Will this be discussed on the ministerial meeting, and what do you expect when it comes to numbers and speed?
Yes, I have some insight on what might happen. It will also be discussed in other fora. It might also come up tomorrow. What I would say here is that I'm not worried. Why not? Because this is exactly what we discussed over a year now. Europe's stepping up, Canada stepping up, spending more, taking more responsibility for our own defense, ending the over-reliance on one ally. Don't forget, in Europe you have about 550 to 600 million people living. US, 350 million, and then we have Canada. Our main adversary has a population of between 120 million and 140 million. You cannot have a situation where around 600 million people have to defend themselves against a country with 120 to 140 million people, an economy the size of the Dutch and the Belgian economy combined, and cannot do that being conscious of the fact that when it comes to the defense of the US mainland, also the European part of NATO is crucial. You could argue that the defense of the US mainland starts in Norway. Why? Because that's where we have to make sure that these nuclear submarines from Russia don't pose a threat to the US mainland. So we are in this together, but this over-reliance has to stop. What will be announced later this week and next week by the US, I think is absolutely doable, and is exactly why we had a process in place starting last year, then coming to conclusions in The Hague when it comes to defense spending. So that's a structured, business as normal process.
Thank you. And with that, we will conclude this press conference. The Prime Minister will now lead the Secretary General to his car, and the Prime Minister will then be back for single interviews. So journalists remain seated.
Thank you.
Thank you.